You're listening to RetRead Podcast. I'm Anna.
I'm Serge, and we're here to talk about books we've read.
Hope you enjoy. Hey Serge.
Hey Anna.
How's it going?
It's going great. We're finally recording yet another exciting episode of our podcast.
If you don't follow us on Twitter, what happened was the laptop that we used to record and edit and everything kind of kaputzed.
The hard drive died. We had to replace it and reinstall everything.
So that's why it's been taking forever to get things done. So we really apologize for that. We think we have a stable system now. Fingers crossed, everybody.
Remember, folks, keep backups.
Read any good books lately?
Well, you and I both listened to Nosferatu.
By our favorite author, Joe Hill.
Yeah, we actually don't really like Joe Hill that much.
I think you dislike him more than I do.
We took a strong dislike to him, I think, with The Fireman. This book was a little bit better than that, but suffered from a lot of the same issues.
Yeah, it was overlong, could have done with some editing, some paring down. It didn't have as much as the annoying foreshadowing anvils that The Fireman had, but they popped up and they were quite irritating.
We were looking for them too. After harping about it with regards to The Fireman for so long, we were obviously going to call him out on anything like that. So maybe it's a little bit less evident to a reader that's not out to get Joe Hill.
I don't think we're out to get...
I was kind of out to get him.
Well, you did seem to like Nosferatu more than The Fireman.
Yes, it was an alright book, but I'll tell you what, again, it was overly long, and in the beginning, as he's describing all the characters and you're getting to know the setting, it was actually kind of okay that he has a long-winded way of describing things. After the halfway point, it gets really annoying because a lot of character introductions end up getting redone over and over again. You've already spent a page describing this character. You don't need to re-describe them every time they're introduced in another new scene. That's ridiculous. And then the other thing that I really disliked was the ending. It seemed like Joe just got tired of his own book and started getting really lazy and sloppy. And it would have been a lot better if he got lazy and cut it short and wrapped it up. Instead, it kept dragging just as much as the rest of the book. But then it felt like he hadn't given it as much thought or put in as many rewrites on it. And so it was a lot less polished. There's one sentence that was just completely mangled. It was like a double negative that any way you thought about it didn't make any sense given its context. So it's not even a double negative that like if you cancel the negatives out, then okay, it makes sense. No. You can cancel the negatives out, it doesn't make sense, or you can leave it as a single negative, and that doesn't make sense either, and it was just like, Joe Hill, just rewrite that sentence. Holy crud. It was awful. What did you think?
I have to agree. I do think that his overuse of introducing characters, one character was morbidly obese, and every time he came up in the book, another character would see him and think, wow, that man is very obese. Or the character would be thinking to himself, these people must be thinking how fat I am. That's not necessary to constantly tell us this character is morbidly obese because a lot of this book takes place over a few days. And I don't think this man is going to be less obese within an hour or two. So that's completely unnecessary, I think.
I think when you first meet him, you're basically told he's always been fat and he will be fat for the rest of his life. Just putting it out there. Because this is one of those books that jumps back and forth between the past and the present and such. And so it's just laid out there like, he's always going to be fat. And you're like, okay, he's always going to be fat. The narrator has told you that, and the narrator is very omniscient in this book, so you're just like, okay, whatever. He's always going to be fat. But then it just keeps getting brought back up.
Yeah, and I do agree that it does seem like he gave up at the end. Not only was it anticlimactic, there were just sentences that didn't make sense structurally, or he would be using nouns as adjectives, but it wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't think of using that noun in that way, descriptive way. So it was really confusing as to why he would do that. And it just seemed like the editor at that point gave up. I do have to say, I like the subtle humor in the book with Manx, the villain. He is actually, I think I called him low-key hilarious. I loved his interaction with his sidekick. And I don't know if I'm supposed to like it as much. He ended up being one of my favorite characters, even though he was kidnapping kids.
Yeah, what a great villain. I have to give props to Joe Hill for writing such an amazing villain. Very memorable. Maybe not that memorable because now it's been almost a month. He's starting to fade a little bit, but definitely a great villain. You know, not every book needs a great villain, but having a great villain really does go a long way.
Wow, he did a great job developing Manx, and I think he did a decent job developing Vic, who was the main protagonist in the book. I feel like a lot of the other characters suffered in their development. There's a character who's supposed to be a 12-year-old boy, Wayne. His thought process was not like that of a 12-year-old boy. It felt very unnatural. It felt like an adult writing a child who's supposed to be older than his years. It just came off really weird. You know, there's a scene where Wayne is thinking about how Manx is probably going to rape him and how he would deal with the rape. And it was this long, overly complicated way of thinking. It really didn't work with the character that we had been presented at that point, because there were, at some points of the book, he came off like a very young child. Do you remember that scene?
I remember that scene. I think the problem with that character is that Joe Hill couldn't make up his mind about what kind of a kid he was. You can have a precocious kid, especially somebody like Wayne who had to grow up fast with his home situation being the way it was. But at times he seemed a lot more childish. And then other times he seems older than his years, and his internal thought process often didn't fit with the rest of his actions and words. And so, especially in that one scene, it was a little bit odd, although that was kind of an awkward scene anyway.
Joe Hill is a writer in his own right, correct?
Yeah.
And I don't want to compare him with his dad, because no one wants to be compared with their parent. But the thing is, when you are entering a field that your parent is very prominent in, and you start referencing that parent's work, it's basically begging for comparison.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I think he referenced Pennywise, the clown.
Mm-hmm. The book is set on the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border. Basically the same kind of setting as The Fireman was set in New Hampshire. So all of Stephen King's books are set in Maine.
Well,
so
I think
he's not really like falling very far from the apple tree here.
I think it's because he lives in that area.
Right, exactly. But I mean, like, that's the exact same thing his dad does. His dad lives in Maine and everything's set in Maine. One fun thing about the setting was we were actually on a road trip through that area listening to the audiobook. It was just funny to hear the roads we were driving down getting called out.
Oh yeah, that was really great. They were mentioning that one of the roads was always congested with traffic.
And we were stuck in a traffic jam.
on that road.
Yeah. Same narrator as Fireman, once again, narrated a great job.
Kate Mulgrew?
Fantastic. Can't say anything bad. She didn't even screw up any accents this time around. But yeah, I feel like her narration style really works well with Joe Hill's writing. And so if you're somebody that actually enjoys Joe Hill's writing, you would probably really like this audiobook.
Yeah, I thought it was better than The Fireman. I did like it more than The Fireman. I thought it moved a little faster than The Fireman, but it still dragged a little bit. I know the book itself is 704 pages.
Oh my god.
You know, the road trip for us was many, many hours. It could have been half that length. It would have been a great book half that length. I actually just finished a book called The Troop by Nick Cutter. It's also a horror novel. It's, I think, about half the length, or maybe more than half the length. But because it's shorter, it really gets to the point, and I was legit terrified for most of the book, because I wasn't terrified, but I did find it like scary, and everything a horror book is supposed to do to you. You feel your skin crawls at the right time, and you're taken on this emotional like journey, and you're just like mentally in this space of, oh my goodness, what the heck, the entire time. Whereas for Nosferatu, I think you're given too much room to breathe. And for a horror book, that is a problem. Like, for instance, the Fear Street book we will be reviewing later. At no point do you have that long suspended tension of what's going to happen, which Nosferatu fails because it's far too long and it doesn't build it up for enough length. Because there are genuinely scary parts in Nosferatu, I think. But because there are too many parts in between that aren't, that emotion sort of gets lost. Whereas, you know, something like The Troop, legitimately scary, you know, it's predictable as all heck. If you've ever watched a movie or read another horror book, you will know, like, what is going to happen. But even knowing all that, I was still taken on this, like, thrill ride, and I enjoyed that book immensely.
So one modern horror book that I have read, probably the only modern horror book I've ever read.
House of Leaves?
House of Leaves. it's basically like a concept book. I think we introduced this idea of concept books in an earlier episode, and still manages to be shorter than Nosferatu, accomplishes a lot more, and actually manages to frighten the crap out of the reader. For those of you who've seen my review of this book, I did skip large portions of the book. Basically, there's 3 different narratives going on at the same time. I just chose one and read that and ignored all the other ones. Even with that, the book was really good for me. I gave it a 3 on Goodreads, which means I liked it. I could tell you that Nosferatu will not be getting a 3 from me. Another comparison, if you want to take a look at just the narrative and how to write a narrative in a shorter book, like 350 pages, that keeps the reader engaged, something like Ready Player One, which is a really simple book. Some people think it's too simple or it's too dumbed down, has too many references, random stuff that doesn't need to pertain to the story. That's Anna, by the way. Yeah, she's waving at me like, yep, that's me. But I thought that book was really engaging, fast-paced, and got the point across, didn't drag, and just kept you right in the seat of it the entire time. Joe Hill, you're clearly writing a more sort of lightweight, easygoing book here. Clearly not a House of Leaves type of thing. So go for that kind of approach. Trim the fat, get rid of the 350 pages of useless crap. Heck, just run like spell check and just delete everything that's flagged for bad grammar. Just delete all those sentences and you probably end up with 350 readable pages as engaging as Ready Player One. Maybe you could get a movie deal out of it or something.
He has had movie deals.
Oh, did they go straight to video?
No.
Huh.
I think Nosferatu is going to be a show. I think Fireman is going to be a movie. Horns already came out with Daniel Radcliffe was in it. He's had movie deals. But going back to your Ready Player One thing, I mean, you can go a step further and take that same fast-paced, brainless type of fun, but take one eccentricity too far. In Ernest Cline's case, it's the references. Yeah. So, Ready Player One for you was like this perfect balance of references, fun, entertainment, whatever. But then his next book, Armada, is essentially the same book, but then he takes the references just a bit too far.
Cranks it up to 11.
And that book falls apart. Like, I am not the biggest fan of Ready Player One, but I enjoyed it and I actually recommended it to you.
Right.
Armada was just a train wreck. So authors just need to be aware that there's a fine balance in writing a good book. And if you throw that balance off just a little bit, you might end up having a train wreck.
I also wanted to add that part of what may have been holding Joe Hill back here is maybe he was initially, when he first started writing, aiming for something more than just that simple story, because he does flesh out his world a lot. There's a lot of backstory in here. There's a lot of ideas that could be used to grow this little universe that he's built up into other directions. There could be sequels, perhaps, or prequels. The whole concept of these people that can, I think they're called like hyper creative or something like that, and they can basically conjure up things from an alternate thought dimension, and they can actually transport themselves there too sometimes. It's an interesting concept, and there's a couple of mentions of other people or beings that are capable of using these powers. They're just dropped in as asides, but are extremely fascinating.
Inkscape characters.
Yeah. Is Joe Hill ever gonna write the story, like a short story about the backwards walking man who you never want to meet in a dark alley? Like, I want to read that short story. If you write that short story, Joe Hill, I will maybe even, pay money for it. Maybe go to a couple writing workshops and then try that. How about that? But maybe this drags the book in 2 different directions, and maybe this is what really confused Joe Hill, because he maybe didn't know where he wanted to go with this. I think one of the problems here is that creating a fantasy world actually takes a lot of time. And for somebody like Joe Hill, where writing is actually his day job, so he's relying on this book to pay the bills. He can't be like Professor Tolkien and take 30 years writing Lord of the Rings. That's not an option.
That's why I'm questioning why it has to be that long. He's not Charles Dickens where he's paid by the word, right? He's being paid for the books.
Exactly.
So they could be shorter and it would be fine because it would
save
be
his publisher some tree money.
It would just be a better book.
Yeah, well, obviously.
I mean, I think I gave Nosferatu 2.5 stars, which rounds to 3 on Goodreads, but it could have easily been minimum a 3.5 star book with enough cutting and better editing. But because that didn't happen, it gets 2.5 stars. Which is unfortunate because, the troupe is not necessarily that much better. It's just all the stuff that I think Joe Hill would have added in and made it like 700 pages doesn't exist. So that's why it gets a higher rating than Nosferatu.
Yeah, I bet you could take, if you had Microsoft Word or text file of Nosferatu, I bet you could make it a like solid 3.0 just by cutting stuff out. Like not altering any of Joe Hill's words, just cut.
Well, it's like what Topher Grace did to the Star Wars prequels, right? I think he made it like a 2.5 hour movie or something. By all accounts, it's a great movie. So
I haven't seen it.
He's not allowed to ever release it,
Right.
Editing. It's a hell of a thing.
Yeah.
You know what could have used some editing? The Knife.
The Knife, yeah. Well, I don't think R.L. Stine really has an editor that cares about that kind of thing. After the intermission, let's talk about The Knife. And we're back. It's time to talk about Fear Street the Knife, and as usual, let's start with prediction accuracy.
I was okay. I said that the murder weapon would be a knife because I have a brain. I said it would be a male murderer, and it was. But I said the victim would be a male, and I was incorrect. I also said that the female on the cover would be a volunteer from high school, and I was correct. What about you?
So I said a scalpel for a murder weapon, and I guess it was like, I don't think it was specifically a scalpel, but it was some kind of surgical knife. So there you have it. Female murderer, I was wrong. Male victim. So what I want to say is there's also a male victim here who gets shoved down an empty elevator shaft in like a scuffle with a female. So maybe I'm technically right here. Maybe there is like a female murderer. Well, it's like
It's not a murderer, and he's not a victim. That's
right.
Self-defense.
Okay, whatever. Anyway, stand your ground laws. I get it. Front cover guy's a volunteer, and the woman is a nurse. And I think I pretty much got that wrong because I think they're both volunteers.
Yeah, and I do like how your mind immediately jumped to, she's a woman, so she must be a nurse. It's a bit sexist.
I feel like I deserve being called out on that. So let's launch into the plot synopsis. We have a prologue.
And the prologue takes place somewhere near the end of the book. You get a few pages of the intense climax, and then you jump to a week before, and you're introduced to Lori, who is volunteering at Shadyside Hospital for the summer. Mm-hmm. She's assigned to the children's wing of the hospital. She encounters a 3-year-old boy named Toby who has pneumonia. Mm-hmm. And she somehow gets attached to him. She finds his discharge a bit suspicious, and she ends up essentially stalking him. She has a run-in with a nurse who doesn't like how Lori is sort of snooping and doing stuff, and that nurse ends up dead. Yeah. Hilarity ensues.
Right. Yeah, so I think she gets attached to him because the kid 2 doors down from him has a million balloons and stuffed animals and stuff. And there's like a running gag in the first few pages of the book. And then this kid is all by himself, no visitors, no parents, and he's crying. And so her maternal instinct kicks in. She actually ends up getting him a little bear. It's cute.
Yeah, it's very sweet of her.
Yeah. So
sweetness sometimes goes too far.
Yeah, so let's talk about Lori Masters, our heroine.
Yeah, she has a willowy figure, and she actually looks good in the volunteer tunics that they have. Her parents died in a boating accident, so she lives with her aunt in the North Hills section of Shadyside. We've encountered the North Hills before, so there you go.
Yeah, actually, in the first book.
One of many callbacks to New Girl.
Yeah, he's trying to recreate the magic here and failing hard.
I don't think he was trying to recreate magic. He was just trying to get his book out.
He's cranking it out.
He got it out, but Lori is volunteering in the hospital. She's actually assigned to the children's wing with her friend, Sky Keeley, who is described as being short, cute, dark hair, and she likes to have dates with multiple guys in one day.
Well, what she'll do is she'll actually cancel one of them. She decides at the last minute which one she wants to break. And it's kind of mean. She's not a nice girl, I don't think. I don't think Laurie is like super nice either. I think they're both kind of a little bit on the bitchy side. Am I allowed to say that on the air?
Well, I'd like you to defend that.
Okay, well, the Sky is pretty easy to figure out why. And then Laurie just thinks that she's somehow entitled to decide how things should go. So she gets gets something in her head, and now she's absolutely, allowed to do whatever the heck she feels that is necessary to do. Even though if any reasonable person took a step back, they'd realize that what she's doing is utterly insane.
I would agree that she did some things that are utterly insane, but I wouldn't say that she's bitchy.
No, I think it stems from her thinking that she somehow has the right to do whatever she wants because somehow she knows better or knows best.
Well, instead of saying bitchy, maybe you would say entitled?
She's entitled.
Because I feel like if it were a male character, you wouldn't say that he's bitchy.
I've called some male characters bitchy.
I don't think you would have described him as bitchy. Yeah. If his name was, Luke Masters, you wouldn't have said, oh, he's bitchy. You would have said he was entitled. So let's change that to entitled.
All right, so I feel like both Lori and Skye are pretty entitled. They're kind of from well-off families, so that might be part of it. Then we got Toby Dean, who we already mentioned is the sick kid in room 903.
Yeah, he had pneumonia.
He's getting all better now.
He's very sweet, I guess, and scared.
He cries a lot, doesn't speak.
I would too if I were in his situation.
He's only 3 years old, actually.
Yeah, well, I remember when I was in the hospital, I think it was 9 or 10, and I was really scared. I didn't cry, but I can imagine, being a 3 or 4-year-old being alone, because he was often alone in the hospital and having no friends, no visitors. I mean, my parents at least brought me balloons.
Yeah.
And I was a 9-year-old, so it's heartbreaking, I think.
And now we got Nurse Wilton.
Who is the nurse that does not get along with Lori?
And she's also, she seems to be kind of short-tempered. When you first meet her, she kind of rushes into Toby's room, kind of basically kicks Lori out of there. Like, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. Kind of cranky. And then it turns out she's also basically the head nurse of the pediatric floor. And so really, if you're working on that floor, you don't want to be crossing her, and Lori's already on her bad side. She ends up getting murdered halfway through the book.
You get stabbed right in the neck, I think.
And then we got Rick Spencer.
He's the guy on the cover. He looks like Tom Cruise, but with red hair.
So basically, we're talking about somebody that's really good shape. You can kind of see his muscles through his t-shirt. He's actually also a volunteer, but he's from college. He's in his second year, and he's hitting on Lori right off the bat.
Well, they both want to do med school, I think.
Yeah.
Is the premise. Lori wants to go to med school and he's in college and he hasn't quite decided, so he said that he would volunteer in the hospital just to get some experience to see if he actually wanted to apply to med school, which if you want to apply to med school you should do some volunteering.
So he's got the world's largest collection of t-shirts. It's apparently his one claim to fame, and he's seen wearing various really stupid Ricky Shore style t-shirts.
I would say they seemed more fashionable than Ricky Shore's.
Okay, I guess they don't have stupid jokes on them. Except for the last one. The last one is something Ricky Shore would definitely wear, which is a white shirt with a picture of a bloody knife sticking out. So it's kind of like a gag. Like if you look at him, you might think that he got stabbed.
If you are wondering, it does play a part in the book.
But when he's first introduced, he's wearing a shirt that says, "Wrong way, go back." I don't even get that. Is that like a street sign or something? Whatever. Lori's Aunt Hillary is a financial consultant. Well, she's auditing the hospital finances, so somebody may end up getting locked up because there may be something amiss with the finances here. And she's the one that obviously owns their big old house in North Hills.
She and Lori get along pretty well, but they give each other a lot of space. Aunt Hillary just treats her like another human being, like just an adult that's living there. It's very chill.
Yeah, but it's not like she's not cold or anything. She really loves her. I think it says she can be overly worried at times. So she'll be like, be careful, blah, blah, blah.
Next up, we have Mrs. Dean, who is Toby's quote-unquote mom. Mm-hmm. She's described as a large woman in a shapeless dress.
Yep, that's how she's introduced.
And she lives on Fear Street. She's constantly yelling, berating, possibly hitting Toby.
Yeah, she hits him, and then she's also unhappy that Lori is stalking Toby. I don't know why. What mother would be afraid of some high school volunteer from the hospital stalking their 3-year-old son? That seems perfectly normal to me.
You mean calling every day and coming to the door and trying to get into the house?
Yeah.
That's not odd.
Nope.
Lori is dating a boy named Andy Price. They don't have much in common. She actually finds him really irritating. She thinks that he's lazy and doesn't have direction in his life. She doesn't like the path he's going down. So at this point, why don't you break up with him? But she probably doesn't want to break up with him because his dad, Dr. Price, and I think he's running the hospital.
Yeah, it's pretty stupid. So yeah, this kid, he kind of is not interested in any of the same things she is. Or maybe it's the other way around, but basically the only thing you really see him being interested in is cruddy movies, right?
He seems to be interested in B-horror movies.
Yeah,
like
we've seen this before.
Guys in Fire Game.
Yeah, and she doesn't have time for that. She has her studies, her volunteer work, and in the few spare hours of time, she prefers to be sleuthing around on Fear Street.
You mean stalking a 3-year-old?
Yeah. So, finally, last but not least, we have Dr. Price.
Runs the hospital. He's disappointed in his son.
Yeah, his son is not on a career path to ever run a hospital. On the other hand, I don't think Dr. Price is doing that great of a job that he would be in a position to be disappointed in his son.
Well, let's get into why not.
Yeah. So, Dr. Price is running a child trafficking ring out of the hospital. Yeah, he's a really bad man.
When his mom is taking him from the hospital, one of the things he tells Lori is, she's not my mom. And Lori's like, what's going on? So you find out that, the lady is actually not Toby's mom. She's part of the child trafficking ring. Aunt Hillary, who is the financial consultant who's auditing the hospital finances, is finding some weird numbers on the hospital books.
I'm saying like child trafficking. They're getting kidnapped, but then they're getting adopted out. So it's not like they're going to some kind of like...
You're assuming.
Yeah. Well, right. It is a kid's book, so they would just be quote unquote adopted, but who knows? Maybe they're just going to work at like massage parlors or something.
At one point, Lori sees Rick in the nurse's station in the children's wing. She sees him pocket some scalpels, and she's like, very suspicious.
Nurse Wilton goes into this, basically there's a new construction going on in the hospital. They're adding on an entire new wing.
It's the Franklin Fear wing.
Exactly.
Franklin Fear is related to Simon Fear, and as a Fear, his name must be on everything. And who doesn't want to be in a hospital wing called the Fear Wing?
I hope this comes back with some mysterious goings-on in the Fear Wing. And that's a restricted area. You're not supposed to go in there. She goes in there, and then the other kid, Rick Spencer, goes in there too. And Lori sees them both go in, and she's like, what's going on? Could this be related to Toby? I want to find out. She follows them in there. And of course, it's a construction site, so there's like empty elevator shafts that go down 10 floors, without any caution tape or anything. Very dangerous, exposed wiring, bad lighting, the whole shebang. And wouldn't you know it, she bumps into the nurse's dead body. She's got a knife sticking out of her. She runs out of there, grabs another nurse, says, Ermagerd. There's a dead nurse in there. Nurse Wilton's been stabbed. They get a security detail. They get everybody else. They run back in there, and the body's gone.
Well, this scene is actually more absurd. She actually grabs Skye, and it's Skye, I think Nurse Gerard, who is another nurse there, security team, and I think some residents from the floor. And they all go there, and there's no body. And Nurse Gerard is obviously really pissed. Like, first of all, you told her one of her colleagues is dead. So she, like, rushes out of the wing when, there are things to do when you're a nurse. So she's has a lot of work piling up at this point. So first there's this dead body that doesn't exist, and she has work to do. So it's like this stupid prank, so she gets really upset. And then this is the weird part where one of the residents goes, oh yeah, no, it's just a practical joke that we residents do.
It didn't make any sense to me. And ordinarily, when something doesn't make any sense, I go back and reread it. And so I did that, and it still didn't make any sense to me. And then I just wanted to move on with the book because I was already getting kind of sick of it.
Because apparently another resident had played a prank on him by putting a corpse in his locker. So he told the girls, listen, don't tell anyone this happened and that I fell for it, and it'll drive this other resident crazy that I didn't react to it. And they're like, okay, because they didn't want to take responsibility for what happened. And I just thought to myself, what? This is what gets you kicked out of a residency program, putting a corpse in a locker. FYI, don't do that. Because let me tell you, even in med school, we were told to respect the cadavers. And if they suspected, like, us doing anything with any part of the cadavers, like, we would get kicked out of school. Like, that is a no-no. And as for med school, for residency, you are held to another level. It is absurd. This is a nitpick, but it bothered me to the point where I have to say it now.
The police, obviously, or the security detail, I'm not even sure that there's a police report here. This whole, like, murder gets pretty much covered up, and Lori decides she's gonna go off on her own and solve the case herself, and she's gonna tie it all together.
Well, the reason that she is so suspicious of Nurse Wilton is because when Toby first gets discharged, she wants to figure out if Toby's okay. So she goes through the confidential patient records, gets his address, and gets caught by the nurse, who then talks to the nurse supervisor and gets Lori removed from the children's floor to file x-rays because, yes, that's a normal thing to do.
Yeah, that's very normal. I'm surprised that Lori got to keep her job after that.
A volunteer.
She should be probably kicked out at this point.
I think the nurse supervisor says something along the lines of, she's one of the strictest nurses we have, and you just got on the wrong side of her, but you've had stellar reviews everywhere else, and we need volunteers, so we'll just keep you around.
Even though that's a very serious charge, that you were sneaking through the personal records of the patients.
Yeah, I don't know what it was like in the 90s, but anyways. Lori goes to the address on Fear Street, and then she finds out, like, I guess the houses aren't labeled, so she's with Sky, Andrew, her boyfriend, and like one of his friends.
Yeah.
And then they have a bright idea of, well, let's just split up and we'll go to a bunch of homes to see which house Toby and his mom are in, and it just so happens that it's the first house that she and Sky go to. So there's actually this fundraiser going on where it's a raffle. You buy raffle tickets and you get a chance to win like a red Mercedes or something.
Yep.
So that's how Lori like tries to ingratiate herself with Mrs. Dean. And Mrs. Dean just wants these kids out of her house. She's like, I'll buy one ticket, but you wait outside. And then of course Lori just like walks into the house and starts snooping, and she sees Toby or whatever and goes, oh, Toby. And you know, the lady's really upset that this girl has walked into her house uninvited.
Yeah, the raffle is actually to raise money for the Fear Wing. Despite Mr. Fear's generous donation, there's obviously not enough money for the whole thing to be built up. Probably a lot of medical equipment has to be bought and things like that. So they're trying to raise money for that. And the funny thing is, when she sees Toby, he doesn't seem to recognize her. You know, he doesn't have his teddy bear or anything like that. He just kind of gives her this soulless, empty look and trudges up the stairs. She calls out his name. He doesn't seem to really react to it whatsoever. And she thinks that's really strange because her and Toby, you know, they got like a really good rapport going at the hospital. So she's kind of weirded out by this. This prompts her to continue stalking this place. She comes back there a few times.
And she calls the house a few times too.
Yeah. The other interesting thing that happens here is she kind of ends up bumping into Rick Spencer. He is driving his car around this neighborhood also. It seems like he's kind of scoping out the place as well, maybe, or maybe he's working with Mrs. Dean. She's not too sure, but she really suspects him because he's acting like really suspicious. Like he's calling her from the hospital, but then denying it and lying about it. And he's acting like really super suspicious.
Well, there's another scene where Lori wants more information on Toby, so she decides to go snoop in his patient record again, and it's not in the children's wing.
Yeah.
She flips out and decides it's a whole conspiracy.
Yeah, you know what the funny thing about this book is? Normally we like to mention like which part of the book we figured out who done it. I think this book was so boring to me that at no point did I even care. I'm reading back on this, like, okay, obviously Rick Spencer is supposed to be the guy you think did it, but it's meant to be presented that way. It didn't even cross my mind while reading the book that, yeah, maybe he's the murderer, or I don't think so, it's too obvious. Well, nothing like that. I didn't even really care who killed the nurse, to be honest.
Oh yeah, Rick Spencer's big thing is that his sister was kidnapped.
Yeah.
So he's trying to find out where his sister is.
Yeah, that's what you later find out, is he's also on his own little investigative mission. But getting completely sidetracked, trying to bang this high school chick, it doesn't make any sense to me, to be honest. Like, if he was there Why isn't the FBI involved? Major kidnapping ring? No, it's one of the, kids' relatives that's basically trying to uncover the whole thing.
So you find out that the reason that Toby didn't react to her that time in her house was because Toby has a twin brother named Terry, and that was his twin Terry. She runs into Toby again in the mall, and he's like, "Oh, Lori," and then the mom throws him in a car and tells Lori to leave him alone. And then she calls the dean's house and goes, "I want to talk to Toby," and the mom goes, "Stop calling the house," and then she hears the mom I think hitting Toby.
Yep.
But after that phone call, the one where she hears the hitting, Lori decides that she needs to go back to the house and rescue Toby. So she breaks in, but she gets discovered by Mrs. Dean, who ends up knocking her out, bringing her to the cellar and tying her up. And Toby ends up coming down and rescuing her, because that's how this book was going to go.
Sure.
He cuts the rope and they drive away.
Yeah, so at this point, she's basically kidnapped Toby.
I mean, listen, she is lucky that there was that child trafficking ring, because...
So she has no evidence for any kind of child trafficking ring. All she has is that she's illegally looked at a patient's confidential records twice. The first time she found them, the second time they were gone, witnessed a murder that nobody believes happened, and then somehow tied it back to Mrs. Dean because an impressionable 3-year-old kid was having a bad time at a hospital and took a liking to her.
Yeah.
I mean, this could have gone so badly for her.
In between all that, she, at one point, she tells Aunt Hillary what's happening, and Hillary's like, maybe you should go visit the grandparents in California or something. And she's like, you don't believe me? I need to talk to Dr. Price. And Aunt Hillary goes, maybe I should talk to Dr. Price for you, because you seem a little excited and emotional. And Lori does not take this well, so she makes her own appointment. She tells Andy that she wants to interview his dad for a project. So she goes over and talks to Dr. Price and tells him everything that's been happening.
Yeah, this is from 2 books ago, the summer camp one.
Lights Out.
Lights Out, exactly, where the main character tells all of her suspects exactly what all her evidence is.
Well, Dr. Price was never her suspect.
She kind of sees him in the elevator with Nurse Wilton when Nurse Wilton is chasing after her after the scene where she's looking through the personal records. So they chase her down together, pretty much, is what she thinks maybe she saw. But then she ends up forgetting that fact, and so in the end doesn't actually suspect him, but we, the readers, we remember.
I didn't remember because I didn't care.
Okay.
But...
Yeah, this book. I don't even know how I got through it.
Let's just keep going. So she tells Dr. Price, she found a dead nurse, and he's like, you saw a dead nurse in the hospital? We need to look into this. So he calls the nurses station to ask for the schedule, and they say, oh, Nurse Wilton is on a 3-week vacation, because no nurses have set schedules in the summer. Everyone's schedule is all messed up, which isn't a thing. People make schedules, and people know schedules, and they don't just get changed willy-nilly.
Well, this is the shady side.
That's true.
Things run different around here.
I mean, this was the early 90s. I don't know. Maybe things are different now. So he's like, oh, okay, she's on a 3-week vacation. Don't worry about it. So when she has Toby in her car escaping the house, she has the radio on. The radio station is giving a news bulletin about a car that was found with a dead woman in it, and it's Nurse Wilton.
I've never heard of a news bulletin. First of all, how convenient, right? That this news bulletin goes out exactly when she's driving the car. But secondly, this isn't even a news station, and murders or accidents like this don't get news bulletins like that, and they certainly don't report the name of the victim.
Also, wouldn't the body have an obvious stabbing wound in the neck? And second of all, the time of death?
Time of death, yeah. It would be like a maggot-ridden corpse by this point.
No, of course not.
Well, I guess you could stick her in a freezer.
Yeah. No, it was a hospital. He could have tried to preserve it a little better, but the fact is that the body's decay, the timing wouldn't match. Even if you put her in the fridge, you can only slow down the decomposition, right? Yeah. But it's still not going to change certain things that will happen at different points of death. Lori wants to call her aunt. She wants to tell her everything that's going on, but then this is another weird thing, where she calls her aunt's office and they said, oh, no, your aunt wanted you to know that her car broke down, so she needs you to pick her up at the hospital. She'll be on the 9th floor at the nurse's station. Why wouldn't her aunt just be downstairs?
Well, isn't this a trap?
from her aunt's office?
Yeah, I think her aunt never left that message. I think that was planted there by Dr. Price. Isn't that what it's revealed later? Like, her aunt's car wasn't even broken or anything, I don't think.
Huh. So the person working in this agency can't figure out the... do you think it was quote-unquote Mrs. Dean? Because Laurie does overhear Mrs. Dean saying, oh, we need to take her out, speaking about Laurie, but we need to take out her aunt as well.
Yeah.
So you know it's all connected at that point. If you haven't figured it out before.
Yeah.
She goes up with Toby because, whatever, she leaves Toby with Nurse Gerard, who really at this point should be going...
Should be calling the cops.
Like, why is this kid here? What's going on?
Yeah.
Laurie was running away from Rick, who was in the garage at that point, so he comes up on the floor, and she runs into Fear Wing, because why wouldn't you run into a dangerous construction zone where you almost fell into an elevator shaft?
Yeah, and I think now it's dark.
Yep.
Actually, this is nighttime, and so there's not even any lighting there. And she actually ends up almost running right into that abandoned elevator shaft. It's not abandoned, it's under construction, and falling down like 10 floors.
Well, it's like the first episode of Travelers.
Except Rick ends up grabbing her, saving her life. And then it turns out, wait, it wasn't Rick. It wasn't Rick that killed Nurse Wilton.
Is Dr. Price.
Yeah, who now shows up and he's all like maniacal and he's gonna kill everybody. He's basically lays it all out, and Hillary is on the cusp of basically figuring out that all the books are cooked to cover up this child trafficking ring that he's running here. This makes so much sense, right? Because I'm just gonna launch right into nitpicks and mythos here.
I was gonna say that Dr. Price was never maniacal. He tried to convince Laurie that he was the person trying to save her, and why would she believe this kid that she barely knew? She's known him her entire life. And it isn't until Rick starts talking that he's just like, F it, and he takes a gun, points it against her temple, and then starts slowly backing up towards the elevator shaft. They both fall into it, but Rick is fast enough where he can just grab Laurie's hand.
Well, he is Tom Cruise, right?
When Laurie was at the Price's house, she and Andy end up getting in a huge fight because he is 100% sure that she is cheating on him with one of the guy volunteers. And how dare she not spend her entire summer hanging out with him and making out with him. And she finally just has enough of his bullshit.
And kills his dad and hooks up with one of the male volunteers.
You wanted to get into nitpicks for a while now. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no, okay, so one of my nitpicks is, how the heck is there this gigantic hospital in Shadyside, right, which is supposed to be a small town, but this thing's, like, massive. And now it makes sense. Okay, yeah, well, of course they have to process kidnapped children through this facility, because there's no way they can get enough patients to actually be profitable. That's why the books are cooked. That's why he's running this stupid scheme and also, you know, raffling off Mercedes, because it's a small town. Yeah, there's a couple small neighboring towns as well. It's never gonna pay for this hospital. And then somehow, yeah, this whole hospital is very suspicious. This could go right into the whole mythos theory that we have.
Well, there's a scene where Laurie is first running away from the nurse, and she ends up in this authorized personnel only section.
Yeah.
And then she ends up, like, hanging out with a bunch of cadavers. Heads everywhere, random body parts in random places. And
this is, folks, let's be clear, this is aside from the Fear Wing. So the Fear Wing is one off-limits section, which is under construction. There is yet another off-limits floor to this hospital with a big old sign that says, this floor is restricted, authorized personnel only. First of all, I've never heard of a hospital having like an off-limits floor that can just be accessed via the standard elevator.
Yeah, that's a keycard access.
That seems really weird, but, you know, whatever, fine. Then it turns out, so at first she's like, what the heck is this floor? I've never heard of it. Even though, you know, it's in the midst of the floors somewhere like 5 or 6. So you would have known there'd be a blank floor that you never go to. Might seem weird. Maybe you would have noticed that. And then she assumes it's part of the medical school. But it almost seems like...
Why does Shadyside have a medical school?
Right. Exactly. Why would it have a medical school? Never been mentioned before. The Shadyside doesn't even have a university. The university's one town over. We're pretty sure Shadyside doesn't have a medical school, and it seems like she's kind of just guessing. I guess maybe it's for the medical school. She doesn't seem like 100% concretely convinced of her own explanation for it, to be honest.
Well, also for med schools, we don't leave the cadavers just lying out, and we don't leave random parts lying out. They are stored because otherwise they get really gross. I mean, they already get really gross. They're in bags and everything.
So I want to ask Anna, do you think this is actually an entire floor of the hospital that's part of a medical school, or do you think this is something else?
Well, I do know that the local med school right down the road over there, their school is in the hospital.
Okay.
But the way that school is designed is that there is a separate med school area and there's a separate patient area. And where I grew up, it's the same way. There's very distinct different places that this is the med school area and this is the patient area. And generally, first year, the anatomy lab, it's not going to be in a hospital because you don't just go through the hospital patients and go, oh, who are we dissecting today? Who died recently? There's another process. So I do think it's a little weird that it's in the hospital, but then again, it is a very small town. If I have to believe that this small town has a med school for their non-existent university because...
So this hospital has over 10 floors.
Yeah.
And they're adding a new wing with 10 more floors.
I mean, that could be the new med school tower. Yeah, I think it's a weird layout, but if it's a small town hospital, I don't know.
They did not describe a small town hospital.
Yeah,
they described a big town hospital.
Well, it's sort of like in Friday Night Lights, where you have to believe that the town of Dillon is a certain size. But then in the first episode, when a character gets horrifically injured, he gets taken to a very high-tech hospital where he can look outside and there's the stadium for the high school football team, and it just does not make sense. And I feel like this is the same way, where it's a small town that needs to suddenly become a big town for the sake of the story.
Twin Peaks, population 50,000, served by a sheriff and 3 deputies.
Well, it's a population of 5,000.
No, but the sign.
Right, but the sign is a mistake, remember? That's what David Lynch said, that sign was just printed wrong because it is a small town and they make mistakes. So it's one of those things. But the hospital in Twin Peaks was actually appropriate for the size of that town because they had one doctor who did everything, it seemed like.
Pretty much. So I just want to say that I think this has to be related to our Fear Street theory.
Yeah, it's probably doing research.
Exactly, yeah. So they're probably doing research. It's not a medical school. It's a research lab. Their body's there. They're not for an anatomy class. They're actually doing dissections that are to do with their research. The whole thing just seems really suspicious. So this could be related to the entire idea where we thought that maybe the high school was actually an experiment, right?
Yes.
And we thought that maybe there's a lot of intense study going into the effects of the mineral.
If this is related to the whole mythos, then why are they running out of money? Why are they running a child trafficking ring outside to raise funds for the hospital?
Right, that's a good point. Maybe the hospital day-to-day operations run on a separate budget. Maybe Dr. Price isn't going to blurt out the giant overarching plan of the anonymous corporation that has been running this whole thing to some high school student and finds that a child kidnapping ring is a convenient excuse to explain what's been going on.
Maybe they're experimenting on the kids.
Could be.
I mean, our whole thing has always been the effects on Shayside High. Maybe they're just trying to start younger.
Exactly. The whole thing that kidnapping these kids and adopting them out, that's just something that Rick Spencer and Laurie Masters assumed. Confronted Dr. Price with it, and it's much easier for him to just confirm their own suspicions rather than be like, no, actually this is this top secret corporate project. He's not going to go and start explaining that stuff. So he may actually know about it, and he may be concerned about Hillary finding out about all the crooked dealings that are going on in terms of the books getting cooked. But, he's not going to write that and then explain it all, and then he dies anyway, so we won't know.
Or maybe he was just a corporate lackey that didn't know.
It's true. Yeah, in the follow-up books of this, it may end up happening that for various mysterious circumstances, Hillary's finding of wrongdoing just ends up getting brushed under the table and nothing comes of it. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if that's what happened.
We sort of veered off from the nitpicks, but can we just nitpick stuff?
Sure.
What's up with his portrayal of nurses? I mean, with all the hate we give Joe Hill, at least he, gave nurses respect in his books.
Right, yeah. Joe Hill has basically, a nurse fetish or something. He builds them up and idolizes them, and that's fine. But here we get nurses portrayed as constantly cranky, constantly in a bad mood, and just being so stressed out that they can't possibly
smile. Look, nurses are the lifeblood of a hospital. And I'll just say this to anyone who's in med school or who's going to start their rotations coming up. Respect your nurses because you are going to need them more than anyone else. She just ran into what seems to be a very grumpy human being, but somehow it became in this book all nurses are awful and cranky and just don't cross them and they don't know what they're talking about.
Right, this is the nurse that's involved in kidnapping and selling off children, so it might make sense that she's a little gruff. Especially when you've stumbled upon her little pet project. But then it somehow becomes, all nurses must be like this.
Nurse Gerard, who was a very nice lady, and the only time she ever got upset was when, they called her out to look at this dead body that wasn't there. And Lori used that as confirmation that, yep, nurses are just cranky.
So you also wanted to mention running up to the code blue called in room 903.
At one point in the cafeteria, that's where they meet Rick, they hear a code blue being called, and she thinks they're saying for room 903, which is the room Toby's in. And she immediately goes, I need to go to this room right now to help. If you're not part of the code team, don't go to a code. Do people not know that? If you are a random student volunteer who has no medical training, maybe she took a first aid class, but she goes to Shayside High, so I don't even know if she knows how to find a pulse. Running into a room with a possible code, you are a nuisance and you are in the way. It's a very hectic room. There's a lot going on. And there's going to be a lot of people there with different jobs. And everyone needs to be doing their thing. And if you're running around underfoot going, oh my goodness, Toby, you're just in the way and you're doing more harm than good. Just a heads up for anyone. If there's a code in a hospital you're at, get out of the way.
Yeah, I feel like this hospital probably wouldn't care if she went to that room and that actually was where the code was called because they seem really sloppy. Right in the beginning, one of the first scenes, the volunteers are going down to the cafeteria and it's talking about the surgical team eating lunch with their booties, their hair caps, and coveralls on. Okay, so there's two possibilities here. Either A, they just came out of surgery and they're wearing their blood-spattered gear that they didn't take off and they're eating lunch in front of everybody like that. Or B, they've put on their gear, realize they're hungry, so they're gonna eat first and then go into the operating theater wearing that stuff. Neither option is good or makes any kind of sense. You're putting on the booties and the hair caps and the coveralls, basically maintain the sterile environment of the room where the operation's taking place. They're just temporary covers on top of your normal clothing. They're disposable, you remove them, and then they either, they might get washed or they might just get thrown out. It's like one-time use. You're not gonna wear them to lunch. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Can I just ask, why did they bring Toby to the hospital?
Supposedly he had pneumonia.
But why did they bring him to the hospital?
Because how else would Lori meet him? And also the child trafficking is being somehow run through the hospital, which I'm not sure that's really necessary.
Right. Why did they need to take him to the hospital? Because Terry didn't come to the hospital.
Maybe they need to do it in order to fake a bunch of medical records.
But you can fake the records without bringing the child in.
Right.
Like they did with his brother.
Yeah, that's true. You know what it is? It's probably because Mrs. Dean is such a shitty human being. She did a terrible job taking care of this kid, and he actually literally got pneumonia. Their shitty cash cow was gonna basically die.
I have no doubt that he had pneumonia, but I'm asking if Dr. Price was in on this and was Nurse Wilton in on it?
Yeah.
If they're both in on it, why can't they funnel medical supplies out and take care of him in the house? It seemed like a big enough house they could have taken care of him there.
That's true.
There's no need for him to go into the hospital.
That's true. Dr. Price is an actual doctor, so he could have probably taken care of a pneumonia.
And so could the nurse.
Yeah, that's a good nitpick. None of this operation actually makes any kind of sense.
And what is the point of having a twin brother for Toby?
So you could see him getting adopted, quote unquote. Some mysterious people show up and take him away in a car.
You could have used any child in that scene.
You also get that sense that, what did they do to Toby? He doesn't even remember me. kind of thing.
But then she sees him like a few pages later and he reacts to her. Like I was complaining about when we were talking about the books before, there was no tension built up. Like he tried to build up the tension and then he popped it right away. So there was no point in having Terry.
Well, there's a lot of superfluous characters. So there's the kids from Shadyside. There's a couple of them that are in the book. We didn't even put them in the character summaries. Like they're so unmemorable. There have been other Fear Street books where you get some side characters that only appear once or twice, but they're still pretty memorable. Like, you know, Suki Thomas, for instance. Sometimes Ricky Shore. They get little bit parts, but you remember them. No, that's not the case in this book.
Was Laurie's whole thing based on the fact that a 3-year-old said that lady wasn't his mom?
Yeah.
We have friends, they have kids, and they're around Toby's age. Maybe a little younger. One of our friends is teaching their daughter how to deal with strangers who might want to take them away. So they've taught her how to say like, no, go away, don't touch me, leave me alone. Short phrases or whatever. So now their daughter has taken to, if she's not getting her way in a store, like they're not going to buy her a toy she wants, or they're not going to go let her play with the ducks by the pond, she will say that very loudly to her parents, and a bunch of strangers will just stare as they beg their child to go into the car and please leave and please stop doing this, as she's screaming like, leave me alone, don't touch me, I want mommy.
Yeah, kids say the darnest things, right?
So, like, while I commend Laurie a little bit for saving these kids from child trafficking because that was what was happening, there is a chance that this little kid was just overreacting because maybe mommy and daddy didn't bring balloons or didn't buy a toy or a stuffed animal.
The kid next door in room 901 had, like, toys flowing out the door. There was not enough room there for all the balloons and crap they got, so maybe this kid was just jealous.
And then she starts stalking this family. And then she ends up kidnapping Toby. I mean, she did kidnap him after she was, like, tied up and stuff. But for all she knows, or for all I know as a reader, like, maybe this book could have gone a whole different way. And they ended up tying her up to wait for the police to come. Because, like, this girl is just nonstop harassing them.
And they'd be justified in doing that, I think. So this entire time, Laurie doesn't actually have any evidence. There's no hard evidence that anything is really going on. But she's like full tilt harassing these people. Yeah, she really just jumps to a lot of conclusions.
And what exactly is Rick doing?
He's just mostly hitting on her, sending creepy phone calls her way, trying to like break into her house. He's a total weirdo.
Did he try to break into her house?
I think so, yeah.
When?
When her aunt was like coming home that one time.
That was Dr. Price.
Oh, was that Dr. Price?
Because remember the aunt said, oh, but that's Andy's Vovo.
Oh.
And then she's like, no, I was on the phone with Andy, but Andy said that his dad was not home yet.
I see. What was he doing in there?
He was going to kill them, I think.
Oh my god. Yeah, I really didn't like this book.
When the part where they go to Toby's house the first time, and it's Laurie and Skye and Andy and his friend. What were Andy and his friend supposed to be doing? Because they don't know what Toby looks like, and they don't know what Mrs. Dean looks like. So are they just supposed to go door to door and, like, expect a child? And if there's no child, then it's not the house. But Toby was not at the front, so it wouldn't matter. Would they say, like, well, there'd be a large woman in a shapeless dress. I didn't quite see what was going on there. Like, it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of nitpicks. My main nitpick is the overarching nitpick is that this book sucks and was a waste of my time.
And let's just pretend that the child trafficking is not part of our mythos and he's actually trying to make money from it. Isn't there a better way to funnel money into the hospital that isn't that obvious?
There's a couple of other things here. A lot of callbacks to earlier books, especially the new girl. For example, the permanent record, quote-unquote, scene, where, if you recall the new girl, Corey has to sneak into the main office of the high school and break into the permanent records chamber and sneak a peek at Anna's permanent record, which he then finds doesn't exist. So this has the same kind of, when she's trying to find out Toby's medical records, she has to kind of sneak into the same kind of room, and there's also a desk and a nurse is there. She has to sneak past. It's like the same exact scene. Really nice callback there. Except she gets caught because she's not Corey, and she's also not an acrobat. Because I feel like even if Corey had gotten caught like that, he would have been like able to do like some cool acrobatic maneuver to escape. But she instead
she was looking for Toby's records,
Yeah.
She was looking at the same place that she was at previously, no? When she first saw his records?
Yeah.
Where all the patient files are kept?
Yeah.
But that's for, like, current patients. Did she not know that after your discharge, your bio no longer stays with all the current patients that are there at the moment?
Yeah, she dumb. There's a mention of Mayra. Yeah, so when they're talking about cranky nurses, she's like, well, I know my friend Mayra has a cranky nurse mom, so I guess that makes sense.
Maybe her mom is cranky because she can't sleep at night anymore because she's worried that her daughter will sleepwalk out of the house.
Right.
That's a thought.
That's a very reasonable thought. Okay, so the expansion is going to be called The Fear Wing. I am, like, really looking forward to a possible follow-up book where some shit goes down in the Fear Wing of the hospital. That would be kind of cool.
You know why this hospital is, like, running out of money?
Because nobody wants to go get treated at the Fear Wing?
Yeah.
Basically. 90s things?
They compared Rick Spencer to Tom Cruise.
Yeah, so this is back when Tom Cruise still looked young. In his
He
earlier...
still looks young.
Yeah, but he played a high school student in one of his earlier movies. I think it's Risky Business. Hospital food is bad.
It's like chapter 2, and they're like, who serves blue meat? And apparently the hospital serves blue meat, which could be a Fear Street Mythos thing for all I know.
Oh my god, you're right. Blue meat? That's part of the study, I guess, huh?
The effects of the blue meat.
The blue meat.
Well, that's interesting because you had mentioned Twin Peaks earlier. Twin Peaks had really awful hospital food. Do you remember the scenes where they're in the hospital? And it was just like weird colored mush.
The doctor runs in like, you really need to send word to the kitchen? Like, this is killing our patients?
Yeah, so I feel like that's a 90s thing because I rather liked hospital food. So maybe that's just me.
If you guys haven't figured it out yet, we thought that this book is awful.
It doesn't make sense. So many things don't make sense.
We have another female protagonist in a long line of female protagonists, but she is not awesome. And I guess she's smart, but she also thinks that she's really smart. She thinks she has all the freaking answers. And she's super entitled and a little bit annoying and just kind of gets lucky. Doesn't actually do anything that great.
Yeah, what does she do?
Nothing.
Well, I mean, she gets Toby out of the house, right?
It doesn't make a difference.
Toby had to rescue her, but whatever.
Whether she did that or not, Dr. Price was going to come after her and try to kill her regardless. He was definitely going to go after her aunt for sure. So, it's just, I don't know. I feel like it made no difference in the end.
Did you have any suspicions about anything the entire book?
No, like I said earlier, I didn't care enough about what I was reading. I thought Dr. Price had something to do with it just because I saw him in the elevator with Nurse Wilton. But I really didn't think of it too much.
I thought it was definitely the hospital was in financial issues. When you first meet the aunt, she's basically talking about how she's auditing the hospital. And then she asks if Andy was over because she saw the Price's car there. And it's like, oh, okay. We already introduced that Dr. Price runs that hospital. And we're already introduced that the hospital is probably under audit for something. So there must be something going on and Dr. Price isn't involved. He must have killed the nurse, but I really didn't care enough to figure out what everything was. And then when they said, oh, it's kidnapping, it's a child trafficking ring or whatever, it's like, oh. And I feel like the problem with this book had more to do with the fact that it was a Fear Street book and he tried to tie it back to Fear Street. I think on its own it could have been a decent thriller and he could have done something really different with it and made it an interesting book. But by trying to tie it to Fear Street and make it a teenage thriller, it just sort of fizzled. It didn't work very well. Because I've read hospital thrillers. Robin Cook does some good ones.
Yeah, I guess it has the opposite problem of Nosferatu in that it actually needs a little bit more fleshing out. It wasn't creepy. None of this was creepy at all. There was no suspense built up.
I think the main hindrance was that it was just teenagers, right? Teenagers and Fear Street. There was just nothing to it. Like, what was the horror element? That someone died? Okay, that's about it. But, you know, he had to follow the Fear Street tropes. Someone has to die. Something has to happen on Fear Street. Fear Street mythos. Andy's friend was chased by, like, something that resembled a bear. And it's like, well, probably was a bear. He had to hit all those marks where there is a Fear Street story. There's a death that's like related to something. You have to have a callback. My era is brought back. Like her name is mentioned, I mean. If you didn't have to do all that, maybe it could have been a better book.
I gotta ask you the question. I think that the question has to be asked now is, are we just getting so tired of the Fear Street series that every book is now going to start to seem more and more bad? Or is it just that this book particular was just heinous?
I thought this book particularly was bad because Lights Out, up until the ending, wasn't bad. Like, what I hated about Lights Out was the ending of...
She gets with that guy.
She gets with Mick, who has been harassing her the entire time. The one with the attic...
The secret bedroom.
Yeah, the secret bedroom wasn't terrible.
Yeah. Okay. So then
issues, so we got a copy from the library, and there are 2 like stabs through the book, and I kind of realized why. Like, it's just not a great book.
Somebody stabbed it with a surgical knife. Okay, so how many bloody surgical implements out of 5 would you give this book?
Can I give it none?
Yeah, because that's what I'm giving it.
I was so bored, and I was just flipping pages and reading, and it was just boring.
Rick Spencer stole all the surgical implements that we could have given this book.
Good job, Rick.
Yeah. If you haven't read Fear Street and you're considering getting into it...
Don't read this one.
Don't get into it with this one, that's right. So if you're at a garage sale or something and you see somebody selling this book for 25 cents, it's not worth 25 cents. Pick up some random other Fear Street book. I'm sure any of them will be better than this one. Let's do predictions for the next book.
The next book is Fear Street, The Prom Queen. She was drop dead beautiful. Prediction search?
Yeah, so it seems like we have the prom queen looking in a mirror and she is dead. The mirror reflection is like a ghostly skull instead of her face. Based on this, I would guess that the main character goes to the prom and is elected the prom queen, but she's also got these weird premonitions, maybe about her own death, perhaps. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to say female murderer and male victim. And I'm going to say that the murder weapon is going to be some kind of like poison gas. Yeah, I'm going to go with like, maybe it'll be like carbon monoxide poisoning or something like that, or asphyxiation due to not enough oxygen or some other kind of poisonous fume inhalation. That's what I'm going with. Anna, what do you think?
Are we going backwards in time? Wasn't this book in the summer? So are we going to prom now?
Yeah, well, we've seen these pile up. Like, sometimes you get like 2 or 3 books that seem to be piled up around the same time frame, but they juggle around back and forth.
Prom season, I too agree that I would say that this girl is running to be prom queen.
She's already wearing the tiara.
The cover is a girl, and she sees a reflection of like this evil skeleton that's like supposedly her. So I bet that's like the prom queen of the past, and she's ready to kill the newly elected prom queen, or like the people who are running to be prom queen or something, right?
I see. That's cool.
Say it's a female victim, say it's a female murderer, and I'll say that it may not be called the knife, but the murder weapon here is a knife.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode.
We're sorry this book was so boring and that we cared so little for it.
Hopefully the Joe Hill stuff was entertaining.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, see you next time, which should be a lot sooner.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about Fear Street, the prom queen.
Thanks for listening to another thrilling episode of RetRead Podcast.
If you like what you hear, give us a shout out.
If not, let us know why in the comments.
Don't forget to rate, review, comment, share, like, and subscribe.
You can follow us at RetRead Podcast on Twitter and Facebook.
Or send suggestions or fan mail to red.read.podcast@gmail.com.
Until next time.
Peace!